wish to start the proceedings. We're already off to a late start. And we're going to start off by the playing of the two national anthems. So could we please rise for the national anthems? Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Akshay Mansingh. I'd like to welcome you to the inaugural MONA debates on behalf of the University of the West Indies, MONA. This is being held in conjunction with the High Commission of India to celebrate the 125th birth anniversary of an Indian luminary, Dr. Bhimrao Ramji Ambedkar, who rose from very, very challenged, underprivileged circumstances to become one of the luminaries in the legal lights of India, along with drafting of its constitution and the fight for equality and justice for all, downtrodden, female, and anybody who was affected by the ills of society. The government of India is celebrating this worldwide, and in keeping with their celebrations, there's a video, a 72-minute video, which is being distributed outside, highlighting the accomplishments of Dr. Ambedkar. As a prelude to this evening's debate, we're going to show a short edited version just highlighting his life achievements and his own education and what he achieved before we actually start the speeches. That's a slight change in the program as we wait the Prime Minister, but we'd like to get started with the edited documentary.
The religion which discriminates between two people is partial. Religion and slavery are incompatible. For centuries, they lived like this, in perpetual penury and social slavery. The untouchables of India. There came a man who gave his life, who gave them dignity, self-respect, and a will to fight for their human rights. Bhimrao was born on 14th April 1891 in the military colony of Mhau in Madhya Pradesh, his father being a Subedar major in the Indian Army. In school, the teachers were kind and compassionate. One of the Brahmin teachers was fond of young Bhim and was so impressed by his intellect that he lent his own name to the young student. And thus, Bhimrao Ambedkar became Bhimrao Ambedkar. Nevertheless, caste discrimination was galore. Bhim and his brother were made to sit outside the class on gunny cloth, for they felt their touch would pollute the other high caste students and the teachers. Despite the congested accommodation Ambedkar's family had in Bombay, young Bhim pursued his studies diligently. Once, when Bhimrao was asked by the teacher to solve an example on the board, the panic-stricken Savarna boys scrambled first to remove their tiffin boxes from behind the blackboard to prevent them from being polluted. Turn in any direction you like. Caste is the monster that crosses your path. You cannot have political reforms unless you kill this monster. Education continued. After graduation, he served the progressive-minded Maharaja of Baroda, Sayajirao Gaikwad, who provided Ambedkar with a scholarship to go abroad, on to the United States of America, Columbia University, New York. Political science, moral philosophy, anthropology, sociology, and economics were his subjects of interest in Columbia. Eleanor Zelliot, a noted scholar of Ambedkar's writings and Dalit literature, says,
1913-1916 were Columbia's glory days. And what did he get in America? I think he learned to have faith in democracy. New York had Italians and Irish, and the American Negro, as it was called then, was coming up into this area.
In 1915, Ambedkar was awarded a master's degree for his thesis, Ancient Indian Commerce. Soon after this, he was awarded the Doctor of Philosophy degree for his thesis, The Evolution of Provincial Finance in British India. From USA to the London School of Economics for advanced studies, and also putting in terms at Gray's Inn for law. But his scholarship remuneration had run out. Despite his efforts, Ambedkar had to go back and serve Baroda state on the insistence of the state's Diwan. While in Baroda, Ambedkar had his first whiff of how even a superior officer, if he is an untouchable, is treated by the lowliest, a sepoy. This learned man, who had earned a doctorate from an American university, could not secure decent accommodation, that Ambedkar returned to Bombay, disgusted. Soon, the prince offered him a scholarship to complete his discontinued studies in London. He completed 2 theses for the London University. Dr. Ambedkar simultaneously put in terms at the famous Gray's Inn. He was called at the bar, the highest honor any person of his background had achieved till then. Ambedkar returned home in April 1923 before the degree of Doctor of Science was awarded to him. From then on, while practicing law in the Bombay High Court, he plunged headlong into his life's mission to uplift the untouchables, to educate them. The first major battle was over the Savdar water tank at Mahad. The beautiful freshwater tank, right in the midst of the town, was open to all. Savarna Hindus, Christians, Muslims, Europeans could freely draw water from this tank, except the untouchables. By a Bombay Legislative Council resolution of 1923, the tanks should be open to all. But it was not so. A conference of untouchables was held at Mahad on 18th and 20th March 1927. We went in a disciplined procession, nearly 25,000 of us. The crusade continued. Dr. Ambedkar had lit the torch of consciousness. In 1926, he was nominated by the governor to the Bombay Legislative Council. As a conscientious legislator, Ambedkar applied his erudition and legal knowledge to champion the causes of the lowly and the poor. Dr. Ambedkar was invited to the Round Table Conference in London in September 1930 as a representative of the depressed classes. The objective of the conference, held at the historic St. James Palace, was to frame a constitution for India by taking into account the views of various sections of people. But Ambedkar's willingness to represent his people at the conference aggravated the resentment of the Indian National Congress, which had boycotted the Simon Commission and also the conference. All those who associated with the conference were roundly condemned and accused as lackeys of the British by the congressman. Committee meetings, Dr. Ambedkar used all his erudition and skill to champion two causes: India's freedom and safety, and the protection of the depressed in a free and democratic India. He was elected to the Bombay Legislative Assembly in the first general elections of 1935 as an independent Labour Party candidate. Lord Bottomley, member of the Parliamentary Committee visiting India, says,
"When I went to India in '46, he was a member of the Viceroy's Council and responsible for industrial matters. I was the only trade unionist, and he said he was keen to get trade unions established and was encouraging employers to recognise trade unions. He also told me he wanted to establish a minimum wage for workers. If I tell you that it was many years later that the British Labour Party embarked upon such a scheme, you'll see how advanced he was and his thoughts."
Through the hustle and bustle of his busy public life, the scholar and the public-spirited man in him produced several monumental works. Education, in his view, was the major weapon to fight social evils. His long-cherished dream was fulfilled when he founded the People's Education Society and started Siddharth College at Bombay in June 1946, and later the Milind Mahavidyalaya, Aurangabad. Greater challenges were awaiting Dr. Ambedkar. Destiny awaited him in Delhi. In July 1942, Dr. Ambedkar was invited to join the Viceroy's Executive Council as a Labour member. Dr. Ambedkar was elected to the Constituent Assembly of India in October 1946. His outstanding moment came when he was elected and made chairman of the committee to draft the Constitution. "I know that today we are divided politically, socially, and economically. We are in warring camps, and I am probably the leader of one of the warring camps. But with all this, I am convinced that given time and circumstances, nothing in the world will prevent this country from becoming one. And with all our castes and creeds, I have not the slightest hesitation in saying that we shall in some form be a united people." Thus it was that on August 15, 1947, India met her destiny and became a free nation in the world. Dr. Ambedkar, besides becoming the law minister in the interim government of Free India, was ordained to become the principal architect of the Constitution of India. The happiest person was Mahatma Gandhi. "It was a proud moment for India," he told Ambedkar himself, "that the former downtrodden had become the lawmaker of Free India." Ended on December 6, 1956, the great journey of one of the tallest sons of India.
जो बिछुड़े हैं प्यारे से भटकते दर बदर फिर.
A fierce social rebel and yet a compassionate reformist. A proud nationalist who would not compromise on the rights of the downtrodden. An iconoclast who believed in the necessity of religion. A champion of women and the minorities.
We'd like to start proceedings in the interest of time by inviting the principal of the Mona campus, Professor Archibald MacDonald, to bring greetings from the Mona campus.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mansingh. I feel compelled to welcome the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, Prime Minister of Jamaica, even in his absence. Your Excellency, Mr. Pratap Singh, Indian High Commissioner, Senator, the Honorable Ruel Reid, Minister of Education, Honorable Floyd Green, State Minister in the Ministry of Education, Senator Albin Hill, Senator Mark Goldin, Reverend Dr. Garnett Roper, members of the Diplomatic Corps, Dr. Derrick Mckoy, Dean of the Faculty of Law, Professor Evan Duggan, Dean, Faculty of Social Sciences, members of our senior management team of the campus, students, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. The University of the West Indies is indeed honored to welcome our distinguished guests, the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, Prime Minister of Jamaica, His Excellency Mr. Pratap Singh, Indian High Commissioner, Ministers of Cabinet, members of the Diplomatic Corps, members of the UWI Senior Management Team, deans of faculty, students, staff, and members of the public. Let me welcome you all to the inaugural Mona debates. It is an immense honor for this institution to partner with the Indian government to present what will hopefully become a signature event for the University of the West Indies, an exercise that highlights the value in cross-cultural knowledge sharing, appreciation, and understanding. As a regional hub of intellectual exploration, the UWI believes that in order to ensure stronger nation building, we must be able and willing to learn from the stories of many other countries like Jamaica who have sought to establish their own national identity in the aftermath of colonialization. The impact of fighting for and ultimately achieving independence has created similar stories of struggle, freedom, and marginalization across the global community of former colonies. Stories and experiences that are beneficial to our ability to grow and establish a path of critical national development. Ingrained in these stories are the typical desire to establish a strong economy, a durable welfare system, a strong educational framework, and all the other necessities that would ensure that the state is able to provide for its people. Included in this process is the need to establish intellectual freedoms, social equality, and social justice, a social justice system that protects the rights of all. In memory of the life and works of the renowned Dr. R Ambedkar, the maker and conscience keeper of modern-day India, the Mona Debates is crafted to examine these issues on a platform that is open and values the importance of appreciating diverse views on issues that affect our society. More importantly, in celebrating the influence that Dr. Ambedkar has had on India's nation building, we also celebrate the strides he made in overcoming his own marginalization to become one of the foremost figures in India's history. For our society, where many are hindered by poverty and social inequalities, his life illustrates that it is indeed possible to overcome personal struggles whilst also showing that an individual should not be defined by the class, race, or territory he or she is born in, but rather the worth and value of their actions and thoughts. A glimmering example of success, Dr. Ambedkar epitomizes the hard work we seek to encourage in all our students in the University of the West Indies so that they too can become pioneering leaders. This evening's moot, marginalized Jamaicans have benefited from independence, therefore examines the trope of overcoming social struggles that affects the lives of many living in both our nations. And I'm eager and anxious to hear the discussions that will be presented by the debaters on this topic. As principal, it is indeed my pleasure to launch this event in partnership with the Indian High Commission, as I believe it will encourage greater cross-cultural and national relations between our two countries. India is certainly considered a growing international powerhouse in research and innovation, and the diversity of its culture provides a wonderful platform for other nations like Jamaica to glean opportunities for our own growth and development. I also hope that it encourages greater thought and open discussion amongst our staff and students regarding the issues of state building. This is a great opportunity for them to learn and witness debates taking place in a supportive environment in which differing views on issues are always respected and recognized. Dr. Ambedkar once stated that the cultivation of mind should be the ultimate aim of human existence. And this debate is certainly being staged in the spirit of educating not only our student community, but the general public, as learning and education is the key to all growth. I wish to thank His Excellency, Mr. Pratap Singh, for approaching the UWI to help the Indian government celebrate the work of Dr. Ambedkar in staging this debate. I am positive that it will become one of our academic community's most revered event in intellectual exploration. Thank you all for attending, and I hope you enjoy what will certainly be a thought-provoking and enlightening discussion.
Thank you very much, Principal. April 13, yesterday, was Dr. Ambedkar's birthday was celebrated at the UN headquarters in New York, with a top official describing the noted Indian social reformer as a global icon for marginalized people, and voiced the world's body's commitment to work with India to fulfill his vision. His birthday will be a day to focus on combating inequalities to achieve sustainable development goals by the UN. Before I invite the High Commissioner of India to come and present his greetings, I'll just give an outline of what to expect for this evening. Following him, we hope to have opening remarks by the Prime Minister, who, as I told you, was at another function, and we've just got word is on his way here. After which we will have the formal debate. The moot, as you heard, is marginalized Jamaicans have benefited from independence, in keeping with Dr. Ambedkar's work, and I'll introduce the debaters as we go along. So I'd like to invite the High Commissioner, Mr. Pratap Singh, to bring greetings from India.
Well, Most Honorable Andrew Michael Holness, Prime Minister of Jamaica, Mr. Ruel Reid, Minister for Education and Information and Youth, Mr. Lord Green, State Minister for Education, Mr. Mark Golding, Leader of Opposition, Senator Mr. Auburn Hill, fellow colleagues, ambassadors and high commissioners, hello. panelists, media persons, distinguished invitees, students, ladies and gentlemen. Also, I would like to thank Principal of Mona Campus, Pro Vice Chancellor Professor Archibald McDonald, and Mona Campus Registrar Dr. Camille Bell Hutchinson, and other deans and members of the university faculties. Well, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I warmly welcome you all to this event, which we are organizing to celebrate the 125th anniversary of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. I express my special gratitude to Honorable Prime Minister, who, in spite of his busy schedule, has agreed to give his inaugural remark on this occasion. I also express my profound thanks to all the scholarly debaters, panelists, who have taken upon themselves this honest task of debating one of the most illustrious sons of India, who during his lifetime remained the most misunderstood, vilified, and abused personality of the 20th century India. I am sure many of you will be hearing about Dr. Ambedkar today for the first time. However, I believe there are quite a few present here amidst us who are well aware of Dr. Ambedkar's life and his contribution to India in particular and to a larger humanity in general. So please allow me to give you here a brief introduction of Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar. Dr. Ambedkar was born on April 14, 1891 in an untouchable Dalit family in Mahao, Madhya Pradesh, India. Being an untouchable, he endured unimaginable and immeasurable humiliation throughout his life. However, braving the walls of prejudice and caste discrimination in the early 20th century India, Dr. Ambedkar emerged as a colossus, an economist, a jurist, an anthropologist, a sociologist, a social thinker, a social reformer, a historian, a human rightist, a statesman, a religious thinker, a philosopher, and above all, a defender of the unity of India. Dr. Ambedkar, as an economist, contributed to the development of Indian economic thought. His theoretical economic views on finance, currency, agriculture, and planning, as contained in his Problem of Rupee, Administration and Finance in the East India Company, Taxes between states and the Union, Problems of small holdings, helped in laying the solid foundations for economic institutions after independence. His recommendations to the King Hilton Commission in 1925 became guiding principles to the establishment of Reserve Bank of India. Commenting on Dr. Ambedkar's theory of public finance, provided in his work entitled Provincial Finance in the British India, which he submitted in 1917, Professor Edward Robert Anderson Seligman, the then president of American Economic Association, had said, and I quote, "Nowhere to my knowledge has such a detailed study of underlying principles of public finance has been made. Ambedkar's impartial and objective analysis of the interesting developments in the field of finance that has taken place in his native country is applicable to other countries as well, unquote. Dr. Ambedkar's works like Untouchables and Why They Became Untouchables and Who Were Sudras are some of his original treatises on anthropology. As a jurist, he was the chief draftsman of Indian Constitution, which is perhaps the best written constitution in the world. His historical works entitled Pakistan or Partition of India, The Problem of Minorities and Languages, What Did Gandhi and Congress Do for Untouchables, Gandhi, Rana Day and Jinnah have now led to the unfolding of Indian history. His works entitled Caste in India, Annihilation of Caste are his original treatises on sociology. As a social reformer, he was an emancipator of the downtrodden masses in India. As a liberator of the underprivileged and constitution maker, he left no stone unturned to get equal political rights to Dalits, tribes, and women, and ensured full constitutional safeguards for the protection of minorities in independent India. For the empowerment of Indian women, Dr. Ambedkar, through his vigorous arguments in the Constituent Assembly, ensured that Indian women, along with their male counterparts, were granted equal political rights simultaneously. I welcome the Prime Minister. It is noteworthy that it took the oldest democracies of the world more than 100 years to grant their women equal political rights, including the right to vote. It was Ambedkar in India who granted equal political rights to women at the same time. Dr. Ambedkar was an advocate of participatory democracy. His emphasis was more on social and economic democracy, without which political democracy cannot succeed. As a champion of social justice, he fought for justice, social, political, and economic. He emerged as an exemplar, an unflinching crusader against iniquities of caste system and socio-economic deprivation that afflicted millions of Indians. He attributed India's socio-economic backwardness to the caste system and untouchability. He said, quote, India's social structure is like a high tower which has many stories but no staircase. In this structure, a person is bound to die in the room where he was born, unquote. Thus, Dr. Ambedkar was, and will remain forever an embodiment of equality and fraternity. His ideas are now finding resonance in economic and social policies of many countries around the world, including India. Today, the world community is faced with challenges of widening socio-economic disparities among peoples of various countries. In order to address these concerns, the international community is increasingly stressing the need of developing an inclusive world order, for which an economist and sociologist, Dr. Ambedkar, advocated almost 100 years ago. A century ago, he must be perhaps the only voice for the empowerment of women and the marginalized people, not only in India, but also in the world. He was equally concerned for the protection of environment and added a new chapter to the Constitution of India as directive principles of state policies, in which he provided that the states would strive towards the protection of environment and wildlife. Dr. Ambedkar's life is truly an inspirational story of achievements, despite trying circumstances and indomitable will to move beyond individual strife for the larger cause of social justice and national renaissance. A truly non-violent, both in thought and action, he fought for the establishment of a society based on equality, liberty, fraternity, and compassion. For him, they were the core values that can enable a society to create an environment in which every individual finds scope for his development. He found these values in Buddhism and converted himself into a Buddhist along with his over 1 million followers. As India celebrates the 125th birth anniversary of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, he remains an inspiration for millions of Indians and proponents of equality and social justice around the world. He gave a voice to the voiceless millions in India who are now increasingly asserting themselves, thereby making Indian democracy truly representative and inclusive. In spite of facing vehement opposition from the orthodox elements in the ruling party of the day, Dr. Ambedkar had his way in making an individual the last unit of administration. This was his humanism. The vision of Dr. Ambedkar to achieve social justice and equality also finds resonance in the core messages of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals. In recognition of this, the UN observed yesterday, 30th April, his 125th anniversary by organizing a panel discussion on the relevance of his ideas to address the challenges of the 21st century. Thought-provoking and provocative, Dr. Ambedkar's life is highly instructive to everyone who yearns for human dignity and equality in human relations in society. That is why his relevance is growing by every passing day in Indian society and elsewhere. Interestingly, many of his contemporaries who vilified and tried to belittle him are fast vanishing from the public memory. In August 2012, in a survey conducted by an independent Indian TV channel, CNN, IBN, he was voted the greatest Indian. Here, I would like to say something about this. The message behind this verdict of the TV channel survey was, सच्चाई छुप नहीं सकती, कभी झूठे वसूलों से, खुशबू आ नहीं सकती, कभी कागज के फूलों से. Its rough translation is like this: truth cannot be hidden by the lid of false principles, because paper flowers never produce fragrance. I will now conclude my talks by quoting French scholar Christophe Geffrelot. Quote, more than 60 years later, Ambedkar's contribution to the making of India is possibly more substantial than any other leader of his generation. He has not only prepared the ground for a silent revolution, but has also played a key role in the drafting of the Constitution of India, which has set the terms for the development of the world's largest democracy. I once again take this opportunity to thank you all for your gracious presence at this event, and I am again thankful to the Most Honorable Prime Minister, Andrew Michael Holness, that he spared valuable moments from his busy schedule and came here to grace this occasion and to give his inaugural remark. Thank you once again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I'd like to officially welcome the Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Andrew Holness, on behalf of the University of the West Indies. Like any other West Indian, he knows that a wicket can drop at any moment and you have to come up and bat without much rest. Prime Minister, the format is T20. We're champions, and I expect that you will be partaking in the champion team. So thank you very much, Prime Minister of Jamaica, Right Honourable Andrew Holness.
All right, so we're going to hit it for 6. And I will probably try to do 2 6s. What do you say about that? We finish. 4? That's, come on, 2 6s. At 12 minutes, we finish. Professor Archibald McDonald, His Excellency Mr. Pratap Singh, High Commissioner of India, Senator, the Honorable Ruel Reid, our Minister of Education, and State Minister in the Ministry of Education and Information and Youth, Mr. Floyd Green, members of the Diplomatic Corps, and I see our senators here, our newly installed Senator Auburn Hill, and believe it or not, my good friend, Senator Mark Golding. Professor Derrick Mckoy, Dean of the Faculty of Law, Professor Evan Duggan, Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences, students, members of the media, friends, good people of Jamaica and India. Good afternoon. My good friend, Reverend Garnett Roper. Good to see you. When the Indians first set foot in Old Harbor on May 10th, 1845, the Falmouth Post, which is one of our first newspapers, reported that newly liberated Afro-Jamaicans lined the streets and then went into their homes to bring out whatever food they could find to comfort the newly arrived Indians who had traveled from so far. That established the relationship between Indo-Jamaicans and Afro-Jamaicans, which still exists today. That generosity of spirit has been extended to all ethnic groups that came subsequently, so that today we can all say we are Jamaicans. Out of many, one people. So today, like many Jamaicans, I can proudly say that I am an embodiment of that motto, and I think you can see why. My maternal great-grandmother was Indian. And I happen to have the great privilege of being reared by her until I was 16. And I had a very, very special bond with her. And if I'm allowed, High Commissioner, I share a personal story. Many years after, I traveled to the United Kingdom to participate in an event put on by the British government. And there I met a lady from India, and she was just staring at me, and I was wondering, why is she staring at me? And then when the conference was over and I was going through the airport, I saw her with her bags, and I felt bad, and I went over to her and I said, "Can I help you?" And we started to talk. And she said to me, you have Indian. I didn't recognize that it was visible. And she says, "Yes, you look like some people in my state." And there you have it. From 1845 to 1917, 36,412 indentured Indians came to Jamaica. Some came to flee family problems at home, others were kidnapped, but the majority came in search of a better life. During this period in 1891, Dr. Ambedkar, himself a Dalit, or untouchable, was born and immediately was subjected to deprivation of basic rights and education, simply because of the very lowest of Indian caste in which he was born. It is truly an honor and privilege to inaugurate this panel discussion on Dr. Ambedkar, who I guess is not so well known in Jamaica. Dr. Ambedkar fought against untouchability, which rational persons rightly view as inhumane, as a scourge to those who suffer under it. His ideas are significantly relevant for a vast majority of Jamaican people whose ancestors also experienced almost the same discrimination during slavery and much of the colonial period. Dr. Ambedkar dedicated his life to awaken the social conscience of modern India. He was a social reformer, a champion of human rights, and an emancipator of the downtrodden. And Commissioner, these are words that we associate with many of our national heroes as well. Dr. Ambedkar's life is an incredible saga. As an untouchable in 1890s India, he suffered enormous humiliation at every step of the way, from his childhood to early manhood. In spite of being faced with almost impossible odds, he succeeded in securing the highest degrees from some of the world's most reputable universities. These included the University of Bombay, where he earned his first degree in political science and economics in 1912. He was called to the bar at Gray's Inn. London University honored him with a DSc degree. I guess that would be a PhD degree today. And on June 8, 1927, Ambedkar earned a doctorate in economics from Columbia University in the United States. He possessed a giant intellect and was a humanitarian ahead of his time. Dr. Ambedkar was an economist, a jurist, an anthropologist, a sociologist, a historian, a philosopher, a fighter for human rights, a political thinker, a social reformer, a champion for social justice and equality, a feminist, a liberator of millions of downtrodden masses, especially untouchables and women, and above all, a defender of the unity of India. He was a prolific writer and authored close to 100 books on varied subjects covering the gamut from economics, politics, sociology, anthropology, history, and religion. This 14th child of a very poor family rose to such national and international intellectual and scholarly heights that he was appointed the first law minister of Free India. He became the chairman of the committee which was given the responsibility to draft the Indian Constitution. Dr. Ambedkar ensured that equal rights for Indian women was indelibly enshrined in the Indian Constitution. Not bad for a poor, untouchable boy from India. Dr. Ambedkar's work in finance and economics established the guiding principles for the establishment of many economic institutions in independent India, including the Reserve Bank of India, which is the central bank. As chief draftsman of the Indian Constitution, he laid the foundations for secular India, and was fervent about justice for all. This is how we framed and combined justice and equality. He said, "Justice has always evoked ideas of equality, of proportion, of compensation. Equity signifies equality. Rules and regulations, right and righteousness, are concerned with equality in value. If all men are equal, then all men are of the same essence. And the common essence entitles them to the same fundamental rights and equal liberty. Justice is another name for liberty, equality, and fraternity." Emphasizing on the social and economic dimensions of democracy, he warned that political democracy cannot succeed where there is no economic and social democracy. It is the same spirit that drove me to emphasize, even before I became Prime Minister and ever since taking the office, that Jamaica must focus on its economic independence if it is to truly achieve political and social independence. The Indians who came to Jamaica as indentured laborers have contributed to Jamaica in many ways. Those who came in the 1960s and 70s and subsequent years have contributed to our economy, our society, our culture. Today, and for decades, Indian Jamaicans have provided healthcare, education, and built the commerce and trade in our country. Indeed, our good friend, Dr. Mansingh, has been rallying around the West Indies. And his son has captained the under-15 and under-17 cricket team. And I gather he played for the under-19 team as well. Yes. Modern India is a leading economic and political power. Last year, it was the fastest growing large economy in the world. And it seems ready to repeat that feat this year. Given our economic growth agenda and our development imperative, it is the intention of this administration to establish much closer ties with India. To that end, as committed in our manifesto and our 10-point plan, I have appointed Senator Orbin Hill as a special investment ambassador to India to develop strong economic, commercial, and social ties with this growing economic powerhouse, which is modern India. The clear objective is to grow trade between our two countries and enhance our economic growth and job creation prospects. Senator Hill has had a long and strong economic association with India. He has lived there as a banker and traveled there many times, over 80 times. Yesterday, in recognition of Dr. Ambedkar's contribution to India and the world, the UN decided to observe Dr. Ambedkar's 125th birth anniversary. Today we are here to celebrate the really significant life of a very outstanding, brilliant, and heroic Indian, Dr. Ambedkar. Both India and Jamaica have constantly tried to correct injustices once they had the right and the opportunity to do so. We have done it through education, through legislation, through social development, and the encouragement of a greater understanding in governance, and by developing in our people a greater social consciousness and personal responsibility for each other. Jamaica has been in the forefront of correcting social imbalances at home and abroad. From Marcus Garvey to Bob Marley, the cry for equality and justice mirrors that of Dr. Ambedkar. So, it is with great pleasure that I encourage you to join in the celebration of this great Indian and international statesman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Both India and Jamaica tried to correct injustices once they had the ability to do so, quoted from the speech just given by the Prime Minister. The moot for today's debate is marginalized Jamaicans have benefited from independence. This is the inaugural Mona debate that we hope will become a fixture in the university calendar. It is aimed at promoting values of good debate, academic exchange, and to that extent, there will be no winner or loser in the debate today. We have 4 debaters who have been asked to pair up to be proponents or opponents of the moot. One of the objectives is to show that you can actually debate a point even if you don't believe it, because they were not asked which side they would like to debate from. They were asked to debate, they were told which side they're going to take. And that's to foster understanding of how people think and the fact that you can think perhaps the way you don't believe if you have to. I'm going to invite the debaters to come up to the front. Honorable Ruel Reid, Minister of Education, Youth and Culture, former headmaster of a school after which Jamaica was named, Jamaica College, and a gentleman who will be starting the debate once everybody is seated as a proponent of the moot. Minister Reid. Dr. Derrick Mckoy, also a member of the proponents, Dean of the Faculty of Law, Attorney at Law, former Contractor General, Chairman of the Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme, and I think everybody knows, author. He has a book called Corruption, which I just saw today, which has me enthralled. He will be on the proponent side as well. Reverend Dr. Garnett, President of the Jamaica Theological Seminary, PhD in Biblical Languages from the University of Exeter, who spent 20 of his 30 years as a pastor in the inner city and knows Dr. Ambedkar's work very, very well, will be one of the opponents of the moot. And Professor Evan Duggan, Dean of the Faculty of Social Studies. And if I was to start talking about Professor Duggan, the whole debate would end right now, because it's a multifaceted gentleman, come from the private sector of Alcan, went to the States, experienced a lot of marginalization himself, and has come back to Jamaica as a high academic who will be one of the opponents of the moot as well. The rules are simple. It's 10 minutes per presenter, and to be adhered to with time. There will be a 5-minute rebuttal afterwards. We will introduce Professor Mishra, but I think in the interest of time, we need to get on with the debate. Thanks. So we're going to start. I will be holding a little placard there with timings just to keep you guided. But as I did say, there's no winner, there's no losers, to show that debates can be held without actually having an end in terms of victors and vanquished. So I'd like to invite the Minister of Education, Youth and Culture, the Honorable Ruel Reid, to kick off the inaugural Mona debate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Most Honorable Prime Minister, ambassadors, principal distinguished ladies and gentlemen. The great Albert Einstein famously said that it's not enough to know. The point is to understand, Einstein cautioned. In discussing this moot, therefore, let us heed Einstein's advice. To understand this moot, we must understand 4 key terms. These are marginalized, Jamaicans, benefited, and independence. Marginalization, according to the Blackwell Online Reference, is a metaphor that refers to processes by which individuals or groups are kept at or pushed beyond the edges of society. The term outsiders may be used to refer to those individuals or groups who are marginalized. The expression marginalization appears to have originated with Robert Parks in 1928's concept of marginal man, a term he coined to characterize the lot of impoverished minority ethnic immigrants to a predominantly white Anglo-Saxon Protestant United States. It later became popular, particularly in Latin America, as a term that captured the supposed backwardness, not of immigrants in developed countries, but of people in developing countries who fail or are prevented from participating in the economic, political, and cultural transition to modernity. Sociology Guide, another credible online source, helps us to understand the term marginalized in a more fulsome and perhaps more immediate sense. Marginalization has been defined as a complex process of relegating specific groups of people to the lower or outer edge of society. It effectively pushes these groups of people to the margin of society, economically, politically, culturally, and socially, following the policy of exclusion. It denies a section of the society equal access to productive resources and avenues for the realization of their productive human potential and opportunities for their full capacity utilization. This pushes the community to poverty, misery, low wage, and discrimination and livelihood insecurity. Their upward social mobility is being limited. Politically, this process of relegation denies people equal access to the formal power structure and participation in the decision-making processes, leading to their subordination to and dependence on the economically and politically dominant groups of society. Who is a Jamaican? Under Chapter 2 of the Jamaican Constitution, persons born in Jamaica and persons born outside Jamaica of Jamaican parents have an automatic right to Jamaican citizenship. Of course, like in any other country, there are other specific constitutional provisions for obtaining Jamaican citizenship. Again, for the purpose of understanding when the moot says marginalized people have benefited, that does not mean the completion of a process through which one receives something tangible and or intangible which improves or promotes improvement. In fact, the word benefited, as used in the moot, should be interpreted as an ongoing and reciprocal process and not a cul-de-sac, not an end in itself. Independence, given the configuration of the moot, refers to political independence, which became official just after midnight, before I was born, August 6, 1962. Now that we understand these key terms, we can now better understand what we are being asked to discuss with regard to the statement, marginalized Jamaicans have benefited from independence. The statement itself begs the question, who are the marginalized Jamaicans that have benefited from independence? To answer that question, we need to remind ourselves that before midnight of August 1962, Jamaicans were still under the rule of the Union Jack. Colonial rule was characterized by wide control of all social, economic, and political conduits of power. Since the white colonials were the minority, they secured and reinforced their hegemony through carefully and systematically engineered systems of differences that were built on variation of pernicious Willie Lynch doctrine. Black Africans who were brought to Jamaica as slaves from as far back as 1509 to work on the sugar plantations after the indigenous Taino were decimated by European diseases, were relegated to the bottom of social, political, and economic ladder. Have the lives of the majority of black population improved since Jamaica gained political independence from Britain? This is really what we are here to discuss this evening. The answer to that question is overwhelmingly yes. Permit me to talk for a few minutes about the significant political, social, and economic changes that have qualitatively and quantitatively improved the lives of Jamaica's major black population since political independence. And of course, my colleagues will give you some more detail on that journey. But political independence itself, how much time do I have left, sir? Was the most powerful psychological victory. It stimulated unprecedented self-confidence among the majority. Many Jamaicans, hitherto independents, were taught that self-determination, like Bob Marley said in his song, War, was but a fleeting illusion to be pursued but never attained. Indeed, the lowering of the Union Jack and the raising of the black, green, and gold Jamaican flag signal the start of a new Jamaica with huge possibilities for especially those who are descendants of slaves for over 300 years. The multiplier effect of political independence and its attendant psychological populism manifested themselves in the unrivaled economic growth of the 1960s, especially on the Jamaica Labour Party, and almost came to a halt in the 1970s. But I rest at this point to allow my colleagues to further expand on this point. Ladies and gentlemen, I rest my case.
We had asked for high-level academic debating activity. I think we've gotten more than that to start with. That was a phenomenal start to the Mona debates. I now call on Reverend Dr. Garnett on behalf of the opponents.
I hope you don't use it against him, my good friend, most honorable Prime Minister. His Excellency, the High Commissioner of India, Professor MacDonald, Principal, members of the Diplomatic Corps, members of Cabinet, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, colleague panelists. I offer sincerest congratulations to the university, both for this first Mona debate and for the moot for the debate, Marginalized Jamaicans have benefited from independence. This Mona debate can only serve to strengthen the reputation of the university as an institution of higher learning and public merit. I congratulate you on the moot for this discussion because it is as simple as it is compelling and relevant. I congratulate the Indian High Commission in Jamaica and the people of India in commemorating the 125th anniversary of the birth of Dr. R Ambedkar. Indeed, Dr. Ambedkar epitomized in his genius the reason we know that among marginalized people is the greatest unmined resource of any country. If by marginalized Jamaicans we mean those from the base of the population who are the direct heirs and successors of our mothers and fathers who were brought to this land in the belly of ships and were denied their humanity in chattel slavery. If we mean the people who resisted slavery and colonialization at every turn through the Maroons, through figures like Taki, Sharp, Bogle, Bedward, Garvey, through movements like the Native Baptists, Pocomania, Rastafari, and gave birth to trade unionism and political parties, to adult suffrage, to self-government. And if by benefit we mean whether or not political independence has created a pathway for mainstreaming the mass of black population in a space that is inclusive and that inures towards human flourishing. And if therefore the question is, have these marginalized Jamaicans benefited from independence? Then the answer is no. At the outset, I assert that benefiting marginalized Jamaicans was never the intention of gaining political independence in Jamaica. To the extent that anything along that line has happened, it has been an unintended consequence of independence. And rather, that what has indeed happened to marginalized Jamaicans since independence has not gone far enough, is not deep enough, has not been robust enough, is not fundamental enough or transformative enough of the status quo ante in Jamaica, is not liberative enough to mainstream the marginalized and to unleash their potential in a way that would make Jamaica a space for human flourishing. I give as an example that confirms that the idea of benefiting marginalized Jamaicans was not in the ken of the Jamaican Constitution in 1962, the comment offered by Sir Hugh Sherlock in the 1995 Commission on the Jamaican Constitution as he made his submission of a possible preamble to the Jamaicanized Constitution. Sir Philip Sherlock OJ highlighted in his blueprint of the preamble, inter alia, I quote, "The African heritage denied, veiled, and belittled by the valid constitution setup of the Jamaican state, whereas Jamaica is the second black country in the hemisphere to achieve independence, and by reason of its history is closely and indissolubly linked to the West African people, and with Afro-American people whose origins lie in the African diaspora. And whereas European domination was rooted in the doctrine of African inferiority, the denigration of Africa, and the inculcation of self-contempt in the people of African origin, it therefore becomes necessary to set forth certain principles enshrined therein. Even now, the Jamaican Constitution as it stands remains a United Kingdom order in council under a United Kingdom Act of Parliament. The basic Jamaican law, its constitution, has ignored the elephant in the room. It has approached the task of shaping an independent Jamaican nation as if there had been no inherited disadvantages and distortions of the collective sense of self that needed to be corrected. Marginalized Jamaicans have failed to benefit from independence in three main ways. First, there has been no national, sustained, systematic, and thoroughgoing attempt to ensure access to land for the mass of the population, or the people at the base of the Jamaican population. When slavery was abolished and black Jamaicans were emancipated, they were given no franchise of land. The Baptist and Moravian churches created free villages, and some of the newly emancipated lived on got parcels of land in these free villages. The great majority, however, fled to the hillside. Nothing was done at independence to address the lack of a franchise of land. What has happened since then, though, through various government programs, projects, and policy instruments, have succeeded only in increments. Initiatives, though well-meaning, like Operation Pride and before it Pioneer Farms, have largely failed and have been made to be the object of odium, scorn, and ridicule. As recently as 2010, the then Minister of Housing observed that 30% of black Jamaicans still live in squatter settlement, unorganized and underserved communities in Jamaica. Not unrelated to the failure to get a piece of the rock is the fact that 70% of tertiary graduates migrate and 80% of young people desire to live anywhere else except Afghanistan. Approximately 200,000 Jamaicans continue to migrate to the metropoles of the North Atlantic each year. This is what was happening at the time of independence, when many left for England, along with others that had already left for Panama, Costa Rica, and Colombia, among other places in Central America. Not much has changed for marginalized since independence. If nothing else, their perception that they cannot make it here has not changed. Secondly, on the question of identity, little has happened to deepen the sense of who we are as a people. At the time of independence, there was an ideology of European superiority. Europe was a reference and the standard for progress, for culture, for civilization. It was thought that Jamaica did not have a narrative of its own, but was the footnote of other people's story. One group that sought to change that above all other groups was Rastafari. Rastafari, but not restricted to them alone, was the fulcrum expression of the struggle over the previous century for Jamaicans to define who we are. From Bogle to Bedward to Robert Love to Marcus Mosiah Garvey, from Pan-Africanism to Ethiopianism to Garveyism to Rastafari to the birth of trade unionism to political movement to self-government to federation to political independence to black power to the civil rights struggle in the USA to democratic socialism, from ska to reggae to rocksteady to dancehall, there is one continuous movement for black people to find a space, to develop a narrative of their own, to express their identity, to be themselves, and to become somebody. From the very outset, there has been a move to suppress this and to deny our Africanness. From the invasion of Pinnacle in 1954, to police brutality at Coral Gardens, St. James, on Bad Friday in 1963, to bring in Rasta dead or alive, to bulldozing of Bacawal in 1966. Throughout the period since independence, with minor exceptions, political administrations have located themselves in ways that are at odds with the quest by black marginalized for identity. Political administrations have failed to provide in Jamaica a space where the marginalized can be themselves and do their best. There have been individuals. In fact, every time Jamaica has been put on the map internationally, it has been from a member of these underserved communities. Rasta was discriminated against, denied justice, persecuted, and today Rasta has been exoticized. But the structures of discrimination, colorism, and vilification of things African have remained intact. Since independence, political movements, therefore, with rare exceptions, have rather tinkered on the edges, played musical chairs, and often used buffoonery, gimmickry, and violence to win elections by manipulating the marginalized Jamaicans. Politics in that respect has distorted our national sense of self. At the time of independence, if one wanted to assert one's somebodyness, one donned sartorial elegance, spoke the Queen's English, and married white. Now, in order to be somebody, they dig off the pigment off their face, binge on smartphones, Xboxes, and hear from Brazil, and engage in the most self-hating, self-deprecating, and self-mutilating violence. Thirdly, There is a lack of economic space for the upward social mobility of the marginalized. The economic options available to the underclass all these years after independence are still too few. Every option utilized by the underclass is rendered irregular, illegal, and made criminal, often in order to protect the economic interests of minority established commercial class. Vending is criminalized and harassed by the authorities without affording economically viable option. Untenanted land settlement is called squatting, an economic affliction conducive to intergenerational poverty for hundreds of thousands. The prime economic zones available in Jamaica are available for those who are not from the marginalized. And let me finish just because I'm out of time. Have marginalized Jamaicans benefited from independence? In one respect, they have. They have smartphones, Xboxes, and here from Brazil. But do they know themselves? Do they believe this land is theirs? Is there a space for them to make a living and to live here? I think they would say they have not benefited. They have to live elsewhere. That is what they say, and that is what they seek.
Strong debate continues. Dr. Derrick Mckoy for the proponents.
Mr. Moderator, Most Honorable Prime Minister, Honorable Minister representing the proposition for this moot this afternoon, other ministers, Your Excellency, High Commissioner for India, and Your Excellencies representing other countries here tonight, Pro Vice Chancellor and Principal, distinguished guests, distinguished opponents, colleagues and friends. If you reflect for a moment on the definition of marginalization offered to you by my learned leader, you'll see that the marginalized Jamaican is one placed in a position of marginalized importance, a position of marginalized influence, of marginalized power. These are persons who regard as not very important. In common language, perhaps, regarded as slight on the mere edges of society. When we define marginalized in these terms, it must be conceded, as my learned friend for the position just pointed out, that there are marginalized persons in Jamaica now, after independence, as there were before it. But put simply, Mr. Moderator, our proposition is that as a consequence of independence, in consequence of the new freedom from control, in consequence of a new competency in one's own affairs, persons in our society who were previously regarded as of marginal importance and who were regarded in the past as on the periphery of power have now achieved something which is advantageous, something which we think is very good. It's easy to support our proposition in purely economic terms. We have a large body of historical evidence, investigated, interrogated, analyzed, and evaluated by a distinguished body of economic historians, beginning with that giant of Caribbean nationhood, Eric Williams, but which includes now in our own generation, our own Hilary Beckles, showing how colonial administrative arrangements were used to transfer wealth from the Caribbean, including Jamaica, to the imperial metropoles. Indeed, even if we confined our discussion to the British Empire, forget what happened in France or in Spain, this exploitative arrangement was by no means confined to us in the Caribbean. 45 years ago, Walter Rodney reminded us in his seminal work, How Europe Undeveloped Africa, of the exploitation of that nation's wealth by the European powers. And in fact, since we're here tonight in association with the Indian High Commission, perhaps we might note that India, under British Raj, also suffered from that expropriation. For example, a textile industry, which was once perhaps the pride of the world, was reduced in the 1850s to 1947 to virtually nothing under British rule in India, and which has only now, again, recovered the preeminence in that country's economy. The historiography of this metropolitan peripheral relationship is very well developed in literature. And it's distinctly characterized by a number of things. First, a pronouncedly one-way, near-dictatorial channel of command, communication, control proceeding outward from the metropolitan center. And second, the transfer of wealth from the periphery going the other way. It requires no great mathematical skill to calculate that if wealth and capital are transferred from one place, from the colonies, to another place, the metropoles, the former will be increasingly impoverished. This is not to say that there were no developments in the peripheral areas of empire. Roads, bridges, ports, railroads, even an educated labor force are necessary parts to maintain that model. And there are many local Jamaicans who prospered. The local plantocracy, for example, the commercial factors, the emerging comprador classes all did well under that arrangement. They, for sure, were not marginalized. Nevertheless, in a marginalized society, marginalized persons are even more disadvantaged. Independence in Jamaica has shown a turnaround in these circumstances. And we may use a simple index of wealth in our community. Between 1960, near the end of the colonial relationship with Britain, to 1913, which is the last date in which we have authoritative figures from the World Bank, the approximate gross domestic product had grown from $0.7 billion in the first part of the period, 1960, to $14 billion approximately in 2013. Now, my friends opposing this moot might all say that all countries grow as populations grow. In which event, we could look then to the gross domestic product per capita in Jamaica in 1960 and at the end of the colonial period, which was $429.14 US, to what it was in 2013, which was $5,289.97, a more than 12-fold increase. This, of course, does not convey the whole picture. While some countries on gain independence have done worse than Jamaica, my friends will say that others have done much better. But it can hardly be an argument to say that we have not done well because others have done more. What is especially important in our weakly developed economies is that weakly developed economies impact more harshly on the marginalized than on the well-off. From this perspective, as the economy in Jamaica has grown significantly since the colonial period, we can say that marginalized persons have obviously benefited from independence. But the arguments tonight, Mr. Moderator, are not wholly economic ones. We should consider how the marginalized benefited from independence in other areas, socially and politically. Consider, if you would, the year 1914. By this time, some several years before, R Ambedkar had already formed his independent Labour Party, had already contested a successful election, was in 3 years from that date, perhaps, would be selected to chair the committee which would draft the Constitution. India had already begun to participate in the democratic process of creating an independent and democratic society. That year, in Jamaica, that year in 1944, a young journalist, Roger Mays, who would later be considered as one of our most important poets and novelists, wrote a 2-page, double-spaced, typewritten article entitled Now We Know, for publication in a local nationalist newspaper, Public Opinion. I've seen the article, it's here on this campus. We're very happy to say we have the original copy of it in the university main library. Roger Mays was by no means one of the marginalized of colonial Jamaican society. People like him would usually find space close to the center. You could have found a position, perhaps, in the colonial civil service. There would been space for him in our comprador capitalist system, perhaps as a manager or maybe a bookkeeper. Or indeed, as he was an academic and perhaps in the emerging national intelligentsia, someone would have offered him a comfortable chair on the Kingston verandas. Mayors, however, demonstrated by a lifetime of work in short stories and books and plays and essays, he chose to lend his voice to the marginalized of this society. Now consider, if you would, the same year that Mayors wrote that article, Ivor Jennings, lawyer and sometime master of Trinity Hall, Cambridge, one of Cambridge's oldest colleges, first published his seminal work, The British Constitution. Jennings' work was seen then as a natural successor, the natural successor to Dicey's work. And Jennings would envision the British Constitution in a way Dicey could not have, as something that could accommodate an independent Commonwealth. But part of Jennings' intention was to demonstrate really how Britain had become democratic. And he used a little anecdote in that story. And the anecdote was quite simply that Chamberlain had gone to Parliament to ask for an increased subvention for the monarchy. And he was harassed. And in responding to the heckling from the opposition, he said, I may be subservient to the monarchy, but I'm not truckling to the populace. I had to look up what that word truckling meant. I didn't know. It really means obsequious subservience. And the simple point is that he was arguing quite simply that in that environment, the politician must now be subservient to the populace. That's what it really means. At the same time, however, our young poet and artist was indicted, charged with sedition, sentenced, and sent to prison for what would have been a mild general criticism. Indeed, reflect, if you would, what independence has wrought. That would not have happened again. Since independence, we can now speak somewhat freely. Quite simply, in a marginalized society, we have the right to democracy, to self-determination. That itself, colleagues, is a priceless benefit.
Mr. Moderator, Most Honorable Prime Minister, Ambassador, Principal of the Mona Campus and Pro-Vice Chancellor, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, fellow debaters, Mr. Moderator, you pitted me against a lawyer and a lay preacher and a pastor. I guess I must be either independent or marginalized. But one of the burdens that I have been relieved of is the definitional burden since I'm speaking last. The immediate difficulty with the motion is that it implies that both the concepts of marginality or marginalization and independence are static activities rather than fluid processes. If they are in fact closed-ended, but there still exists blocks of marginalized communities in Jamaica whose conditions independence should have alleviated, then we can assert indeed that marginalized Jamaicans have not benefited from independence. To be marginalized is to exist and operate on the fringes of society or group with negligible importance, influence, or power, and the perpetual experience of an interconnected set of fault lines of ills, such as inferior education, or none at all, extreme poverty, unemployment, poor housing, lack of basic health care, poor nutrition, the sense of not belonging, and very little opportunity for social and economic mobility. These are not conditions that are relievable by occasional handouts, particularly when those handouts are designed not so much to benefit the victims as to commodify them as reliable and cheap voting blocks, for example. Typically, these are subgroups within a population excluded because of race, ethnicity, class, caste, religion, or other similar variables. Often, as a result, entire communities may be coerced into lifestyle options that are not optional. It is difficult in this regard not to reflect on Tivoli Gardens, the West Kingston community that we know very well, where in 2010, several Jamaican citizens lost their lives in the security forces' quest to apprehend Dudus, as we all know him. Tivoli Gardens is a community of high-rise apartments by local standards, which are constructed to relieve the abject living conditions of residents of the community previously known as Bacco Wall. The new self-contained Tivoli Gardens, named after the well-known amusement park and pleasure garden in Copenhagen, Denmark, consisted of much improved housing stock and amenities, such as a school, community center, and daycare centers. Somehow, though, real transformation, I don't believe, ever took place, and Tivoli became the most potent example of a physically, socially, economically, and psychologically marginalized community in the country. Not in the sense of lacking influence, but certainly detached as a unique subculture. More than 50 years after what should have been a transformative process, poverty and lawlessness seem to have been Tivoli's most defining characteristics. Well, they made their own laws. Prior to the 2010 invasion, the community was largely isolated from the rest of the country, seemingly with its own extra jurisdictional arrangements. The point is that the only antidote for marginalization is its end, meaning demarginalization, and the full integration of affected individuals and communities into social, cultural, economic, and political life of the country. When that occurs, the condition is appropriately referenced in the past rather than the present tense, in terms such as formerly or hitherto marginalized people or communities. To the extent that there remains large tranches of the Jamaican society that are marginalized, one can argue that they have not benefited from independence, regardless of whether they occasionally obtain token benefits or in keeping with our Charter of Rights and international conventions, they have access to the basic necessities, such as education, for example. Ultimately, if they remain marginalized, as implied in the topic, then they have not benefited. The goal and decisive measure is full integration. Around the world, historically marginalized groups have included Native Indians in North America, the Aborigines in Australia and New Zealand, the Afro-Latino groups in Central and South America, and the Dalits, the untouchables in India. But the above are minorities. The irony here in Jamaica is that the group that has been most marginalized is in fact members of the majority black population, the descendants of former slaves who since emancipation have operated on the fringes of society. The basis of this marginalization has been race and skin color and a history of economic exploitation, which has resulted in chronic intergenerational poverty among descendants of former slaves, and in some cases, former indentured servants, the original East Indians, for example, of the old sugar belt in places like Clarendon and Westmoreland. Upon emancipation in 1938, the slaves got nothing with which to begin their lives as free people, and the powers that be continued to structure post-emancipation institutions along the lines of British society, ordered on the basis of race and wealth. This meant that the old planter class and newcomers of lighter pigmentation from anywhere in the world could take advantage of economic opportunities created by emancipation, but the newly freed slaves could not. This was the trajectory up to 1962, and the driving force behind historic uprisings, such as the Morant Bay Rebellion in 1865, and the Workers' Uprising in 1938, and later the Black Power movement that migrated to the Caribbean in the late 1960s and 70s. Political independence in 1962 obviously did not bring about a magic end to the marginalization of black majority, particularly economic marginalization. Neither were there many deliberate mechanisms to integrate them into the new economy or to dismantle the domination of those who set up shop in the immediate post-emancipation era and directly benefited from the plight of the vulnerable majority. It must be noted that Mauritius, for example, one of the thriving economies in Africa, negotiated a wealth redistribution strategy with members of the private sector at the time of its independence in 1968 to bring more of the people into the formal economy and reduce poverty. Mauritius has also successfully moved away from a strongly elitist education system, the one with access of higher quality and greater inclusiveness. These are critical demarginalization measures in post-colonial societies for which Jamaica has not yet acquired the appetite. The two-tiered structure of our education system in particular remains a foundation for prolonging inequality and a fodder for continued marginalization. The reality, of course, is that independence was not actualized in the 1962 Political Act of the lowering of the Union Jack and the unfurling of the black, green, and gold. It was simply the beginning of the process of becoming or being independent, the continuation and acceleration of a process to restore the dignity and the right to liberty and self-determination taken from the black population during more than 300 years of slavery and colonialism. It should have signaled the beginning of our own effort to reverse the effect of the physical and psychological violence of plantation slavery and the economic and social and cultural distortions left in its wake. I will go to my conclusion because I'm pressured by our moderator. I'm being marginalized. So, the concept of economic independence, meanwhile, remains a distant dream. Internally, it remains dominated by a handful of entities that have been in existence over decades. Most began in some form of merchandising, but have not been able to leverage their assets into other areas, such as construction, manufacturing, tourism, banking, etc., operating as monopolies for long periods. Globalization now poses the biggest challenge to their entrenched hegemony, rather than the birth or growth of indigenous competition, or any initiative of government to address the structural imbalances created by their historic advantage. The masses, meanwhile, remain in the lower classes with little or no assets to leverage into entrepreneurial activities, even among those who might be innately innovative. It is easier, it seems, for the overseas journalists like Ken Chaplin in a newspaper column titled Random Reflections on the 50 Years of Independence, just days before the country celebrated its 50th anniversary of independence, asserted that in the 50 years of independence, government has provided many critical social services like education, health, and housing, but these have been outpaced by the rapid population increase. The area in which the governments have failed miserably is in fueling economic growth to put more money into social services to meet the population increase. And there are several quotes like that. The extent of the powerlessness of large swathes of the population is concealed principally by two factors. One, the increasing dominance of the political process by people of African descent, and two, the strength of the African culture. The precisely mentioned New York Times. The New York Times article had this to say on the subject. For all the 3 centuries that Britain ruled Jamaica, the island's deepest influence is not English, it is Africa. And my colleague earlier mentioned that these are the persons who have put us on the map, but they are yet marginalized. Of course, this, of course, is a position which Dr. Ambedkar, I'm sure you would want to hear this, moderator, in whose honor we hold these debates, would certainly agree. A renowned social reformer who waged the campaign against social discrimination of the Dalits or the untouchables would have no patience with the way we treat many of our people. And he surely would recognize the intersectionality of race and class here in Jamaica. And in his own words, every man who repeats the dogma of Mill that one country is not fit to rule another must admit that one class is not fit to dominate another class.
This has been debating at its best. We have the rebuttals to come, but before that, I'd like to recognize the presence of Honorable Kamina Johnson-Smith, Minister of Foreign Affairs, who I know has had an extremely busy schedule, but I think her presence just asserts the closeness that she has with all countries that share diplomatic relations with Jamaica, and especially with India, and I know you've tried very hard to get here, and welcome. We're going to have 5-minute rebuttals from each speaker. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to come up between speakers, so I'm going to ask them to come up in the order that they came. 5 minutes, please. And at the end of that, we will have a vote of thanks and complete.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I am moved to redirect the moot and to remind my opponents that the moot properly stated is that the marginalized Jamaicans have benefited from independence, which means, therefore, it is not that they may not currently exist, marginalized group, but whether the extent to which they exist, they have benefited. In fact, my learned colleagues even went on to say that one of the outcomes of the marginalized group is the fact that we've had a number of our graduates graduating from Jamaica. And yet, some of those same marginalized groups have benefited from 80% government subsidy for tertiary education, which actually empowered and qualified them for the opportunity to have gone abroad to do very well for themselves. Those same groups, which is not unique across for Jamaica, Ireland, India, those countries have benefited from persons who have migrated where, can you imagine what would happen to the Jamaican economy without the remittances from those who have migrated. So I don't buy the argument, therefore, that the marginalized have been so marginalized that they, in their migration, is a consequence of being marginalized. Michael Manley, one of the great things he did, Mark, in the 1970s, was free education. And today, Jamaica is one of the few countries in the world that between 19 and 20% of our expenditure budget is spent on education. And we are proud of the fact that we achieved for many years universal primary education. Now we're boasting universal secondary education, even extending the school opportunity beyond 5 years to 7 years. And so when you look at the entire population, marginalized or non-marginalized, these have been benefits extended to everyone. Indeed, I need not talk about even the same marginalized that benefited from free light, free water, and even captured land. And I could even tell you that the very same marginalized, even when the toll road was open, they got an opportunity to get a 3 days of free ride. But seriously, our opponents would have us to believe that the structure of today's Jamaican society, modeled on construction foundation of slavery. Yes, that the majority and the marginalized are overwhelmingly still at the bottom of the social and economic political rungs. Society, yes, remains stratified, which is not unusual in any society. But while this perspective cannot be discounted altogether, it ignores the reservoir of evidence that proves that in Jamaica, the social, economic, and political structures have been set in place over the last 53 years that have improved and promoted improvements in the lives of the majority of the black population, as I have said before. The fact that the majority of our internal business, political, and economic leaders look like us, me, must count for something. Before political independence, the face of internal business, social, and political leadership was almost all white or near white. Right here at University of the West Indies, across the Caribbean, you have graduated over 65,000 students since their founding. That must count for something. And there is absolutely no hindrance to students who do very well. Opportunities are found, whether through Student Loan Bureau or the grant, for them to achieve this particular objective. To argue that Jamaica has a kind of caste system of marginalization which predestines a specific group of Jamaicans to be hewers of wood and drawers of water flies in the face of the great reality. That is, it is the achievements of the poor children of the poor, those from disadvantaged communities that have in fact created brand Jamaica. Our great musicians, artists, athletes, scientists are by a majority people who hail from below crossroads and far from the hills of the upper St. Andrew. Ladies and gentlemen, indeed, our marginalized have benefited from Jamaica's independence. I again rest my case.
I sympathize greatly with my colleague. He's been asked to argue something he doesn't believe, and the evidence just simply does not support his argument. You know, the irony is I listened to the Governor General today give a reason for a new not a new program, but a rebranded and extended program to extend the stay in secondary education institution, precisely because if those persons graduated at the time when they would ordinarily leave school, they would be unready for the work world. This is what we are saying, that it is best to know where you're going before you start out. And we have not yet accepted that we are seeking to build a Jamaica for all, and in particular, those with inherited disadvantage. Even if we take the language in which education is conducted, it puts at a disadvantage those whose homes do not use English as its primary language. We are saying that it is not that independence has been bad or that independence has not achieved some good things. What we're saying is that the base of the population has not been intentionally included, and the major factors, land, and we know because we have the crime stories, crime statistics, and the bodies to prove it, that there is a correlationship between social underdevelopment, lack of access to land, and increasing crime rates. So that we have to accept that we can't continue enjoying the psychological benefits and the optics of independence if we do not fundamentally address the structures which were used to divide the population prior. Law has made progress. We have all of the institutions. What we don't have is the intention. But I know my colleague did not choose the side on which he argued, so he has my sympathy.
Colleagues, I don't think we're allowed to rewrite the moot. We must debate it as it's given to us. And the moot is, if I recall correctly, marginalized Jamaicans have benefited from independence. Not that no one in post-Jamaican society is not marginalized. Indeed, we recognize the fact that our institutions perhaps are not adequate for the task of our ambitions. We may have bigger ambitions than we have. But the reality is that we are better off when we can determine our own circumstances, where we can make our own mistakes and recover from them. When we can criticize with impunity a government which does not live up to expectations, and when we can, if circumstances warrant, vote them out of power. That's in fact what independence means, an opportunity to define your own options. Indeed, if I may be allowed to use the language of the man we honor today, R Ambedkar, when he expressed in these terms, democracy is not merely a form of government. It's primarily a mode of associated living, of conjoint communicated experience. It is essentially an attitude of respect and reverence towards our fellow men. And that is what happens to us. Without independence, our lives are not our own. The best of us, our brightest, our best academics, our best scholars, the person who we regard as one of our national poets, cannot voice a moderate criticism, which would not raise a stir in a current tutorial in this university, which would send him to prison because he dared to oppose the then government. At the same time, in the motherland from which the institutions came, they were accepting the fact the duty of their politicians were to kowtow to the broad populace. And this is a challenge. We recognize, of course, that we have failed in many ways. But that's what independence means. The right to fail on your own purpose and to recover from that failure. Not the ability never to fail. When you live in the colonial experience, you have none of these rights. The ambitions we see that achieved in India in terms of giving people rights came after independence. It's not to suggest that persons before independence were not concerned. But the ability to manage your own affairs came after you had a right to determine whether you go left or you go right. And indeed, a judge once said, really, when someone is given a discretion, you're given discretion to go right. You're given discretion also to go wrong. That's the power we get in independence, to make right and wrong decisions. And at the end of the day, decide where we want to go. So we cannot but acknowledge the fact, when we reflect on our mood, that all of us were worse off before independence than we are now. Look at this institution, look at where we are. Reflect on what we've achieved in this community. My learned leader referred, of course, to 60,000 Jamaicans have been trained. Where did they come from? Where did they all come from? Just look around and see the social advances we have made in economic terms and salaries and so on. To be sure, we are not happy with what we have. We have not had the land reforms we expect we should have had. To be sure, we have not had the protection of rights we believe a new society require. We treat some of our members rather badly, atrociously, but we acknowledge that it's now in our hands to make those changes. Are we to be happy? Should my friend be happy if the changes were made by somebody else? Are we happy in the colonial environment where an attorney general comes from Britain, as happens perhaps in some of the colonial territories now, to determine what is right and wrong for us? Or do we want to have a say in how we develop our own experiences? It seems to me that that's the critical issue, that independence does not mean that we're all wealthy, or that every society becomes Singapore. We have not all achieved that. Some of us have done very, very badly. But what independence means, of course, is that all of us, imagine if you would, what happened in the last election. Going to the election, a family, one person dressed in green, the other, the spouse, dressed in orange, both equally determined to go out and lay the vote at the same polling booth. They could have stayed home, and had the same effect. But they want to make that fact that we are independent now. Our voices mean something. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Moderator, my colleague and I are not here questioning the value of independence by any means. We're all proud celebrants of our independence and sovereignty. We wouldn't give that up for anything. We would fight for that to the death. But that is not the question under consideration. The question under consideration is whether marginalized Jamaicans have benefited from independence. That is a completely different question. The answer is absolutely no. There is no question that many of us have benefited from education and from shaking off the shackles of the white man. Many of us have. In fact, one of my colleagues, the legal luminary, we went to the same high school. He, of course, lived on a different side of town from me. And when he came to school, when he came to high school, many of his prep school friends came to high school with him. I was the only person who came from my primary school. It is difficult. Several of those persons are now living in blissful poverty after many years of independence. Has independence helped to, as the marginal status being affected by independence? Not at all. You know, for those of us who took the opportunities when they came, perhaps listen to William Wordsworth, who in his famous ode, Intimations to Immortality, said, our birth is but a sleep and the forgetting, the soul that rises with us our life star, hath somewhere else is setting and cometh from afar. Not in utter nakedness, we learned that at high school, not in entire forgetfulness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come from God, who is our home. Heaven lies about us in our infancy. Shades of the prison house begin to dawn upon the growing boy. And he goes on to say, at length the man perceives it die away and fade into the light of common day. What he was talking about is the progressive loss of innocence that humanity faces as we move, as we go between infancy and adulthood. Most of us who have taken the opportunity that independence afforded us, the few of us who did not come from the right side of town, essentially, as we progressively lost innocence, we correspondingly gained a sense of the price of advancement against the considerable odds of our unfavorable starting positions. That was our contribution. There are several others who would love to do that, but have never been able to muster the resources to better themselves. Yes, we are happy for independence, but there are many marginalized Jamaicans nevertheless.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've just witnessed one of the most fascinating debates I think we've had in Jamaica, a debate that actually took place with the sort of geniality that we expect from people of such ilk. Thank you very much. Congratulations to our debaters. They've acquitted themselves well. I think you'd agree that it was extremely close. I think somebody won by 1 seat, but I really don't know who it was. On behalf of the University of the West Indies, I'd like to say that this is something we'd like to see continue. We'd like to see this continue. I'm going to ask His Excellency, the High Commissioner, to just give a vote of thanks that he says he feels compelled to give right now. But I do not wish to keep you for too long after that, so I think that would be the final word. So on behalf of the university, and certainly for myself, I'd like to thank everybody who's taken the time out to come and participate in the debates. Like you, I too need to go home. And I was told that if I did not tell you that this was my wife's idea, the Mona debates, that I would not be allowed entry at home. So let me get that out of the way, but I'll leave the last word to His Excellency.
Well, first of all, I appreciate and thank the organizers to pick up the moot, marginalization. In my country back home in India, this issue is still being debated. It's a very hot issue, marginalization, demarginalization, upliftment, and all these things. So it's a very relevant topic which was picked up for being discussed today here. And I am thankful to all the debaters who discussed this issue so thoroughly and reflected their minds on the marginalization and demarginalization. So I don't know how far the marginalized here have benefited, but we certainly benefited from your ideas, from your views on marginalization here. Also, I am very thankful, particularly Dr. Man Singh and his entire family who have made a lot of efforts to put this night together here. Without their efforts, it could have not been possible to organize this evening. I am thankful particularly to the Prime Minister by his graceful presence at this event. In fact, he has encouraged us. It has raised our morale to organize these kind of debates, and I hope that in future, as a bilateral cooperation, many such issues will be debated in this campus or somewhere else, wherever the venue is made available. Particularly, I am thankful to the principal and all his faculty members that they made this venue available for us to put this night together. I thank you, all the cabinet ministers, senators, once again debaters, and the audience who showed their patience to hear this debate. I hope that they will certainly must have got some idea about the relevance of Dr. R Ambedkar, how he fought for the marginalized sections of society, how we can do here for the Jamaican people's benefit to fight against marginalization or to put measures in place so that they could be uplifted, they could be ameliorated, and they could be part of the mainstream society. So this is the relevance of today's debate. And I think, as I pointed out earlier in my speech, Ambedkar, who throughout his life fought for the amelioration of the weaker sections of society, marginalized, underprivileged women, I think he is equally relevant to be discussed even in Jamaican university and Jamaican society. That is what I mean is the message today we have tried to convey through this debate. I once again take this opportunity to thank you, all of you, and I look forward to many such debates being held in future in the University of West Indies. Thank you once again.